Political Capital is brought to you by Uber Canada. Learn more at uber.com/flexibilityworks.
CHEK Podcasts.
Hey everyone, and welcome to Political Capital, your source for all the latest in BC politics. I'm your host, Rob Shaw. This week, not just BC politics, but federal politics as we near the finish line in the 2025 federal election. Voting date is April 28th. All sorts of dynamics, ridings, polling, potential things at play that we are going to dig into this week. We're going to bring in the panel to talk about it. We have a special guest this week, Angelo Isidorou. Normally, we'd be talking about you, Angelo. You're the executive director of the BC Conservatives, but we're talking federal, so we can bring you on the panel and chat about that. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Jillian Oliver, longtime Green strategist, and Jeff Ferrier, longtime New Democrat strategist. Those are kind of the hats that they're wearing this week. And thank you for being here. Thanks for breaking down the federal election, which, to be fair, I think maybe got overtaken by some BC stuff in the first few weeks. And now as we get into the final campaign, we're all turning our minds to it to go from there. So first, the BC breakdown, 43 ridings at play going into the election. The Liberals and Conservatives each had 14, the NDP 13, the Greens 1. We aren't going to get into any specific polling, but the larger trend lines are kind of a near tie, slight lead, Liberals with the Conservatives nationally, the NDP dropping sharply, the Greens at some low levels as well. So figured what we would do here is highlight some ridings, get the themes of the election through those ridings. We'll do a bit of a riding raffle here. Angelo, you get to go first. You get to pick a riding, break it down for us and why you're interested in it and what you think people should take away from it.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to pick North Island Powell River for a couple reasons. One, I think it's emblematic of the story around the NDP struggles in this federal election. To me, the NDP caucus and sort of their base is split between their urban ridings and their urban representation and their rural ridings and the representation there. I'm thinking of like Esquimalt Valley, North Island Powell River being another one, and a few others. So while we're seeing some incumbents, for example, in Vancouver from the NDP that may hold on, I think we are going to see a situation where not all the NDP goes to the Liberals. In rural areas like North Island Powell River, that NDP vote, I believe, is actually going to go to the Conservatives. Aaron Gunn is running their Conservative activist. He's running against Tennille Johnson, who's a Indigenous city councillor in Campbell River. She's running for the NDP. Jennifer Lash is running for the Liberals. And I think, again, what we're seeing is a demographic and an archetype of a riding where you have blue-collar, hard-hat workers that probably would have traditionally voted, with their union or voted NDP, but have now shifted away towards the Conservatives as part of Pierre Poilievre's more boots, less suits sort of narrative. And I think what we'll see there, and what we'll see probably in the ridings surrounding it, Courtney Alberni and onwards, is a Conservative victory. So I'm paying close attention to that one as sort of an archetype of what we may see, not only in what I think is going to be a significant demise for the NDP, but a new realignment for the Conservatives.
It is a fascinating dynamic, that kind of rural-urban split that we see provincially and we're seeing federally here. There's 10 ridings that are outside of Metro Vancouver and the island. The Conservatives hold 8. There's 2 that they think they're going to pick up. You mentioned Esquimalt Valley, and there's also one down in Similkameen South. There's a long name for that one, but they're hopeful about that too. As you're right, as Poilievre has campaigned in a lot of rural, interior, factory, sawmill, LNG kind of natural resource type ways when he's been in the province. Jeff, Jillian, either of you want to jump in on that?
I'll just say that Angelo's right, that one of the NDP's challenges, and this is less about the campaign that they've run and more about how they organize between elections, has been a suboptimal effort to engage working class people on issues that matter to them, hearing them and responding to them, and in service of some more urban issues. And so that's we'll see on election day how that plays out. There's some strong NDP incumbents, Gord Johns and Taylor Backrack are two who immediately come to mind. But it's going to be, I think those are absolutely conservative NDP fights, and it's going to be interesting to see how they go.
Mm-hmm. Jillian, it kind of squeezes out, when you have that dynamic, it squeezes out people from maybe thinking about some of the other parties in a riding where everyone's boiling it down to just those kind of two.
Definitely think that more than ever, we're seeing a lot of strategic voting happening this election. I think, and people really kind of concerned about, who's the best party to beat the guy that I don't like. I think, that is driven a large part by the Conservatives having had such a strong sort of like early pre-campaign and still kind of holding on to they have the most fixed vote. Their vote is the most solid, the less likely to leave, but they've kind of seemed to have hit a bit of a ceiling. As Poilievre's negative impressions have been rising, more and more voters are looking to vote against him. And I think that's really driving strategic voting. And that's another big reason why you're seeing the NDP and the Greens plummet in terms of their popular vote. I think, though, it's going to play out differently in every riding. In some cases, the Liberals might be the spoiler and split the vote away from a Green or an NDP incumbent or potential challenger. So it's going to be a really interesting one.
Yeah, we'll come back to vote splitting because it's going to probably pervade through the ridings that we're picking here. I'm going to exercise my host prerogative to throw a riding in here. We can go on this one for a bit. Abbotsford South Langley. Mike de Jong, former BC Liberal cabinet minister, passed over for a Conservative nomination, now running as an independent. That's hard. It's hard to do. He's running against Sukhman Gill for the Conservatives, a young gentleman who has, I think, calling it maintained a low profile would be understating it in the election campaign. He hasn't been very visible. Kevin Gillies from the Liberals, and there's also a new Democrat as well, Darcina Yakadewela. Hopefully I pronounced that correctly.
Pretty sure you got it wrong, but good effort.
Thanks, Jeff, for pointing that out to everyone. But Angelo, let's go to you on that one. Independents in the last provincial election, we put a lot of emphasis on them. It was a hard go. What does it look like in a riding like this, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's a precedence for this. We've seen this movie before, and certainly during the provincial election, not sitting here, but on the other side, managing the campaign, I was slightly frustrated with all of you giving so much airtime to these independents when I was confident they were going to get eviscerated, and they did get eviscerated. And you couldn't have a better example when Mike de Jong served alongside some of those same incumbents that ran as independents provincially, and they didn't even come close. It's really hard to run as an independent. I mean, Jody Wilson-Raybould was really a unique situation where she was getting like a lot of earned media across the country. In this case, yeah, you do have a really young and experienced candidate in Sukhman Gill. But at the end of the day, I think most people that walk into that ballot box, not to discredit local candidates because they don't like hearing this, they vote for the party. People tend to just say, what's the Conservative guy? Yeah, I'm going to pick that person. We like to think that the local candidate matters, and the local candidates certainly like to think that that is the case. And they do matter to a degree. But I think, Mike de Jong putting out endorsements from John Van Doggen is not necessarily going to move the needle in terms of getting votes out. So I think
Ed Fast, he did get an endorsement from the
that one matters more than Van Doggen. I'll give you that. But again, I just look at the way people vote, and they say that local candidates contribute up to 5% of the outcome, depending on how effective they are. Mike de Jong does not necessarily have tons of money and software and data that he could use to do voter ID and get the vote out. I think that if even the NDP and the Greens are struggling to get airtime in this hyper-partisan environment where people want clear binaries, I think de Jong's really going to struggle, and I think ultimately it's going to be a Conservative victory. But I do think there's a story to tell here about nominations and how parties conduct themselves. And I mean, the Conservatives knew that this election was coming for some time. So when they called these nominations and how long they waited. And I mean, look, I'm guilty of it. Like, we didn't have our nominations perfect either provincially, but I do think there's a story to tell there, for sure.
Yeah, they kind of shot themselves in the foot a little bit on the way they did that at the last minute. Getting airtime has never been a problem for Mike DeYoung. I saw him campaigning the other day on a horse, just riding around on his horse with a big flag campaigning, which you don't see that very often. More likely in your neck of the woods, Jillian and Nelson, than anywhere else.
But honestly still have not seen that. Hopefully we have some B-roll for everybody who can watch it.
I'll just jump in and say that, look, Mike DeYoung's got 3 decades of public service. He's respected across the aisle. Independents bring an important voice into campaigns, provincial and federal. And, Angelo cited Jody Wilson-Raybould as an interesting example of someone, an independent who was able to cut through. I think if in this election, if there's any independent in Canada who's going to be able to do that, it's Mike DeYoung. 30 years of public service, strong name recognition, respected by the community. We'll see it happens. Or
he splits off a bunch of Conservative votes, and the Conservatives split off some votes, and you have suddenly
then the NDP liberal wins in Abbotsford.
Well, yeah. Jeff, let's stay with you. Pick a riding that interests you, and let us know.
Yeah, my riding that I've chosen is Esquimalt, Saanich, CHEK, and the reason why I think it's interesting is, we've been talking about it already a little bit on the show. It's national brand versus the local candidate. This is a riding. It's got Esquimalt, Colwood, View Royal, Metachosin, CHEK, and parts of Saanich. The NDP won with 43% in the redistributed riding in the last campaign, with the Liberals and Conservatives neck and neck. And this is about the candidates, right? And this is the story of what can happen in a sweep when you elect candidates that you're not sure you had a chance to elect in the first place. So you've got the NDP candidates, Maya Tate. She's respected Saanich mayor, long track record on housing and emergency preparedness and climate policy in the community. And then you've got, for the Liberals, Stephanie McLean, a former Alberta NDP cabinet minister, with a very...
Certainly not beloved by the NDP.
I would say that she has a very mixed record from the time she was a cabinet minister in Alberta, and that's my way of saying something without getting sued. She previously donated and spoke favorably of and to Pierre Poilievre. She's gone on social media and called elected office a part-time job. And is the kind of candidate who gets put into a riding who you're not sure you're going to win. And then there's a national move, a national wave, and then you have, you're a potentially governing party, and you have, caucus management issues as a result of some of the candidates you didn't think were going to win who do win. And
what about the Conservative, though? The Dr. Cool.
He's got the best name.
Not a Bond villain.
The best name in BC. But I really think this is a NDP Liberal riding here. And my message to the Liberals is, if you have some last minute resources to put into a campaign, maybe put it into a different riding. It kind of reminds me of this. Maybe the students of history of BC politics will remember that Paul Reitsma, former BC Liberal MLA elected in 1996, beat Leonard Krogh in the Parksville riding, did that. But there was this fella in that riding named Warren Batenko, who wrote letters to newspapers saying that Paul Reitsma was the best MLA ever and his opponents were crappy. But the thing is that the Parksville newspaper, if folks remember the story, said that, well, that handwriting of Warren Batenko's looks very, very familiar to us. So they had a former Royal Canadian Mounted Police handwriting expert come in and look at the writing, and they're like, yeah, Warren Batenko is Paul Reitsma. It's the same person. It's the same person.
God. And then they pulled off the mask, Scooby-Doo style. Yeah. It's like, it's Paul Reitsma.
Then they ran a story that said, MLA Reitsma is a liar and we can prove it.
Yeah. There was and he almost got recalled.
Yeah, he was going to be recalled, and then he quit. Right, but I believe in second chances, and I don't want to harp on him as a candidate. But just to flag, and in waves, you can sometimes, as a governing party, get some interesting folks that you didn't expect to win who might be a challenge. But we'll see what happens.
Angelo, what do you think? What do you think of ridings where it's kind of boiling down to that Liberal NDP fight, but also, as Jeff pointed out, where the candidate needs the rising tide of the National Party to raise their boat, which on their own they can't do?
Yeah, I mean, I think it definitely affects the party, but I think what's interesting is those red-orange seats, I think, are differentiated on the island versus on the mainland. So like Vancouver Kingsway, Vancouver East, I would really put in a different bucket compared to, Esquimalt or that surrounding area, because the Conservatives, I feel, could be strong enough where if the Liberals overperform, they could potentially split the vote with the NDP and the Conservatives manage to actually squeak it out. Because, again, the Liberals historically haven't been as strong on the island. So if they are becoming stronger, you have that possibility. And it's also in a region that I think is interesting, particularly when I look back at the provincial race and how we did around there. I know Wanda Fuka-Malhat's not quite in the same area, but there is some potential there, I think, for Conservatives to potentially squeak it out just through a really bad vote split. So, Jeff is right. I think Mark Carney has spent some time on the island, and if you're an NDPer, I wouldn't be too thrilled about that because you need those seats.
Mm-hmm. I'm not gonna pick the Vancouver ridings, but if Vancouver Kingsway, Vancouver East fall for the NDP in the election, holy moly, we're that party's in big trouble.
Yeah, I think those. If you're looking at the two seats in British Columbia where the NDP is likely to hold on, those are the two. I think if you start looking at Pierre Julien's riding in New West and the island seats, those are far more hotly contested than those two. But if surprises happen, we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens.
And it would be sort of the opposite of what you describe in terms of those incumbents like Jenny Kwan and Davies. They're pretty popular. They've been there for a while. They're well liked. So it'll be interesting to see how voters react to the reality of, okay, I'm a progressive voter. I don't want the Conservatives to win, but also I really like my member of parliament. They've been here for a long time. They represented me. So do I have permission to vote for the NDP?
Yeah, and that's why the NDP is putting up these lawn signs in addition to the candidate's name that say in BC, we vote NDP to stop the Conservatives. So that's exactly the question that...
Give them that permission in the face of national polls, sort of scaring them. Jillian, the popularity of an incumbent exceeding the trajectory of their party, I'm just guessing, might bring us to a riding that you might be picking.
Yeah, I was going to talk about Saanich Gulf Islands. That's the one green riding that they currently have in BC. They've also had Nanaimo Ladysmith before that they're also, maybe they might even be stronger than Saanich Gulf Islands just because of the way the vote breaks down. And I think that's because the potential for a Liberal surge in Saanich Gulf Islands is much greater than it is in Nanaimo. And that's kind of what I was referring to earlier in the show, where the Liberals have the potential to play spoiler here and actually elect a Conservative. And you see the Greens trying to make that same argument that the NDP is elsewhere on the island, that they're the ones to beat the Conservatives, they're the strategic vote, and also trying to lean on Elizabeth May's track record of delivering for her community.
Wait, what? That's my riding. Fill the potholes.
But she's been in for 14 years, which is a really long time. Sometimes that's an asset and people want to stick with someone that they've had for a really long time and that they're comfortable voting for. Sometimes they feel like it's time for a change and that someone's kind of, been great, but they've sort of had their turn. So it's going to be a really interesting one. Obviously the Greens were not in the leaders debate. Elizabeth May wasn't going to be representing them either. They were going to put their co-leader, Jonathan Pedno, in instead. But I still think that it hurts their argument about sort of how they can punch above their weight in Ottawa when they don't have that sort of national spotlight. So it's going to be, I think, one of the most interesting ridings to watch. Yeah, for sure.
Angelo, we talk about on the show provincially often the weird overlap sometimes between the Green and Conservative votes. And you look at Saanich Gulf Islands where you have a kind of eco-conscious, older, sometimes wealthier population and a riding that in the past had Conservative federal cabinet ministers in it, has strong pockets of support, but then also has the kind of Gulf Islands. And that dynamic always kind of fascinates me.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've told people in Ottawa about this because they sort of try to analyze Vancouver Island in BC, and they're often confused by Vancouver Island because it seems as though they could go either far one way or far the other. I think fundamentally Vancouver Island voters are somewhat populist in one way or another. They're weird, and I say that with love, because they're very individualistic. And I think that Saanich Gulf in the islands is a good example of, again, that liberal surge could hurt Elizabeth May, and you could end up with a conservative because there actually are some Green voters that, again, even we saw this provincially, who, again, are eco-conscious and they love the environment, but then they flip conservative on certain specific issues. Certainly was the case for us in Juan de Fuca Malahide, which we almost won. I think it was just, over 100 votes that we lost by. A ton of voters there were telling us that they were Green otherwise. So there is that phenomenon. I'm not entirely sure why it is.
I have a theory. I have a theory, Angelo. I think you're right. I'm not going to diss Elizabeth May. I'm not going to say people should vote against her and elect someone else. My sense from being in the riding is that it's boomer, former progressive conservatives who feel guilty about aspects of how they left the planet, right? So you end, and they're very individualistic, but they're like these guilty conservatives, and that manifests in voting for Green. But so there is that. If they switch, it is most likely to the conservatives. So it'll be. Again,
I think it is also that kind of populist, that sort of like anti-establishment argument that you see kind of both parties making. People who really want change from the status quo, I think, are sort of gravitate to sort of both current versions of the Greens and the Conservatives.
Yeah, I think that's right.
We'll leave it there for the TV edition of the show. Thank you for watching us. Angelo, thanks for filling in on the panel this week, and thanks to the rest of the panel. We didn't get to my riding of Nanaimo Ladysmith, my home riding, home of the Nanaimo Bar. But we can, if you're watching this on TV, hang around, get the audio podcast version. We'll get into that as well. See you on election night on CHEK TV. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next week on Political Capital as well. Political Capital is brought to you by Uber Canada. Learn more at uber.com/flexibilityworks.